The greatest fortress against destruction lies not in external walls or alliances, but in the complete reconstruction of one's inner architecture. When a man destroys his weak self, he becomes impervious to the arrows of others, for there remains no vulnerable target for them to strike. This is the ultimate Machiavellian strategy, the transformation from seeker to sovereign, from one who proves to one who simply is. In the shadowed corridors of power, where princes rise and fall with the turning of seasons, there exists a truth that separates the eternal from the ephemeral. It is not the loudest voice that commands attention, nor the most desperate gestures that inspire loyalty. Instead, it is the quiet certainty of a man who has killed his weaker self and emerged as something altogether different, a presence that draws rather than pushes, that magnetizes rather than manipulates. The weak self is the architect of its own destruction. It builds elaborate scaffolding of explanations, constructs monuments to its achievements, and chases validation like a merchant pursuing debts that will never be paid. This weaker version of ourselves operates from scarcity, believing that respect must be earned through constant demonstration, that worth must be proven through endless performance. It is exhausting work, and ultimately futile, for respect extracted through desperation carries no lasting value. Consider the nature of true power as Machiavelli understood it. The most effective princes were not those who constantly reminded their subjects of their authority, but those whose very presence made authority self-evident. They did not chase loyalty, they created conditions where loyalty became the natural response. They did not explain their decisions endlessly, they acted with such clarity of purpose that explanation became unnecessary. This is the aura of authentic power, not the desperate grasping of the insecure, but the magnetic pull of the complete. The journey from weakness to strength begins with a profound recognition: everything you have been doing to gain respect and admiration has been working against you. Every explanation offered when none was requested, every achievement brandished like a weapon, every moment spent chasing validation from those whose opinion should hold no weight over your sense of self, all of these behaviors emerge from the weak self, and all of them repel the very thing they seek to attract. The weak self believes in scarcity. It operates from the premise that respect, admiration, and loyalty are finite resources that must be fought for, competed for, hoarded when obtained. This scarcity mindset creates the very behaviors that destroy magnetism: the need to prove, the compulsion to chase, the urge to explain. When you operate from scarcity, you communicate to the world that you are not worthy of what you seek, and the world responds accordingly. But there exists another way of being, one that the strong self understands intuitively. It is the way of abundance, of certainty, of magnetic presence. The strong self does not chase because it has learned to draw. It does not prove because it simply is. It does not explain because its actions speak with such clarity that words become redundant. This transformation from chaser to magnet represents the death of the weak self and the birth of something far more powerful. The destruction of the weak self is not a gentle process. It requires the courage to examine every behavior, every response, every instinctive reaction that stems from insecurity. It demands the strength to abandon comfortable patterns of seeking validation and the wisdom to understand that everything worth having will come to you when you stop chasing it. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of the transformation. To gain everything, you must first be willing to need nothing. When you stop proving, something remarkable happens. The world begins to notice. Those who were previously indifferent find themselves curious about your quiet confidence. Those who dismissed you when you were desperately seeking their approval begin to seek yours. This is not manipulation in the crude sense, it is the natural response of human nature to authentic strength. People are drawn to those who possess what they lack, and most people lack the security that comes from not needing external validation. The man who has destroyed his weak self operates from a fundamentally different paradigm. He understands that his value is not determined by others' recognition of it. His worth is not contingent upon approval, his strength not dependent upon acknowledgement. This inner certainty creates an aura that others can sense immediately, even if they cannot articulate what they are sensing. It is the aura of a man who has resolved the fundamental question of his own value and no longer needs others to answer it for him. This transformation affects every interaction, every relationship, every professional endeavor. In conversations, the man who has killed his weak self listens more than he speaks, not because he lacks confidence in his opinions, but because he has no need to prove his intelligence through constant commentary. When he does speak, his words carry weight because they are chosen carefully, offered from a place of genuine contribution rather than desperate self-promotion. In professional settings, this transformation is even more pronounced. The weak self constantly seeks to demonstrate its competence, often through excessive explanation, defensive justifications, and the exhausting work of managing others' perceptions. The strong self simply performs with excellence and allows the work to speak. It does not chase promotions but creates value that makes promotion inevitable. It does not explain its decisions to death but acts with such clarity of purpose that explanation becomes unnecessary. The romantic implications of this transformation are profound. The weak self approaches relationships from a place of neediness, constantly seeking reassurance, explanation, and validation from partners. It creates elaborate strategies for maintaining interest, spends countless hours analyzing interactions, and exhausts potential partners with the weight of its insecurity. The strong self, having resolved its relationship with itself, approaches romance from a place of completeness. It does not seek a partner to fill a void but to share an abundance. This fundamental shift changes everything about romantic dynamics. The process of destroying the weak self begins with brutal honesty about current patterns of behavior. You must examine every instance where you find yourself explaining when no explanation was requested, proving when no proof was demanded, chasing when you should be drawing. These moments reveal the weak self in action, and recognition is the first step toward transformation. The weak self has elaborate defense mechanisms. It will argue that explaining is simply being considerate, that proving oneself is taking responsibility, that chasing is showing initiative. These rationalizations must be dismantled systematically. True consideration does not require endless explanation. Genuine responsibility does not demand constant proof. Authentic initiative draws opportunities rather than chasing them desperately. As you begin to recognize these patterns, the next phase involves systematic replacement. Where the weak self would explain, the strong self simply states. Where the weak self would prove, the strong self demonstrates through action. Where the weak self would chase, the strong self creates the conditions for being sought. This is not about becoming passive, it is about becoming magnetic. The strong self understands timing in ways the weak self never could. It knows when to speak and when silence carries more power. It recognizes when withdrawal creates more attraction than pursuit. It understands that being occasionally unavailable makes your presence more valued, that saying no sometimes makes your yes more meaningful. These are not manipulative tactics but natural expressions of a man who values his own time and attention. Social dynamics shift dramatically when you operate from this transformed state. People who previously took you for granted begin to notice your absence. Those who rarely initiated contact find themselves reaching out. Conversations that once felt forced become effortless because you are no longer working to control them. You participate authentically, contributing when you have something valuable to offer, remaining silent when you do not. This natural rhythm creates far more engaging interactions than any amount of forced performance. The transformation affects not just how others see you, but how you see yourself. The weak self was constantly comparing, measuring, evaluating its worth against external standards that shifted like sand. The strong self operates from internal metrics that remain constant regardless of external circumstances. This stability creates a foundation that cannot be shaken by others' opinions, moods, or reactions. Professional advancement takes on an entirely different character when approached from this transformed state. Instead of desperately networking, you build genuine relationships based on mutual value creation. Instead of overselling your capabilities, you deliver consistent excellence that speaks louder than any sales pitch. Instead of explaining every decision, you act with such clarity of purpose that your competence becomes self-evident. The weak self believed that more was always better, more explanation, more proof, more pursuit. The strong self understands the power of less, fewer words that carry more weight, fewer gestures that create more impact, fewer pursuits that yield greater results. This is the mathematics of magnetism. As desperation decreases, attraction increases exponentially. One of the most significant shifts occurs in conflict resolution. The weak self approaches disagreements with the desperate need to be understood, often escalating conflicts through excessive explanation and defensive justification. The strong self states its position clearly once and allows others to accept or reject it without attachment to their response. This detachment often diffuses tension more effectively than any amount of explanation or justification. The transformation extends into leadership dynamics as well. Leaders who operate from the weak self constantly seek validation from their teams, explaining decisions to death and desperately trying to maintain approval. Leaders who have destroyed the weak self lead through quiet confidence, making decisions based on what is right rather than what is popular, and inspiring loyalty through consistency rather than seeking it through explanation. Financial relationships also transform dramatically. The weak self often makes money decisions based on the need to prove status or worth to others, leading to poor financial choices driven by external validation rather than internal wisdom. The strong self makes financial decisions based on authentic values and long-term vision, creating true wealth rather than the appearance of wealth. Family dynamics shift as well when you operate from this transformed state. The weak self often seeks approval from family members, explaining life choices defensively and desperately trying to maintain familial harmony through compromise of authentic values. The strong self maintains loving relationships while standing firm in its principles, creating respect even when agreement is not possible. The weak self was terrified of disapproval and would contort itself into countless shapes to avoid rejection. The strong self understands that universal approval is neither possible nor desirable. By accepting that some people will never approve regardless of what you do, you free yourself to act authentically rather than strategically. This authenticity paradoxically makes you more appealing to those whose opinion actually matters. As this transformation deepens, you begin to notice that many of the relationships built during your weak self phase were fundamentally transactional. People were drawn to your desperation because it served their ego or their needs. When you stop being desperate, these relationships naturally fade, revealing their true nature. This can be initially disturbing but ultimately liberating, as it clears space for connections based on mutual respect rather than mutual neediness. The strong self develops what might be called strategic silence. It understands that every word carries weight and that speaking less often increases the impact of what is said. This is not about being antisocial or disengaged, but about being intentional with communication. When every word is chosen carefully, people listen more carefully to what you say. Physical presence also transforms during this process. The weak self carries tension from the constant effort of managing perceptions and seeking validation. The strong self moves with natural confidence, occupying space without apology, maintaining eye contact without agenda, speaking at a natural pace without rushing to fill silence. These physical changes occur naturally as internal transformation manifests externally. The relationship with failure changes completely during this transformation. The weak self viewed failure as evidence of unworthiness, something to be explained away or justified. The strong self understands failure as information, learning from it without attachment to others' interpretations. This relationship with failure allows for much greater risk-taking and, paradoxically, much greater success. Time management reflects this transformation as well. The weak self spends enormous amounts of time managing others' perceptions, crafting explanations, and pursuing validation. The strong self reclaims this time for productive pursuits, personal growth, and genuine relationship building. The hours previously wasted on impression management become available for creating actual value. The transformation affects goal setting and achievement as well. The weak self set goals often based on what would impress others or gain external validation. The strong self sets goals based on authentic desires and internal values. This alignment between goals and authentic self makes achievement more satisfying and sustainable. Sleep even improves during this transformation. The weak self often lay awake rehearsing conversations, analyzing interactions, and worrying about others' perceptions. The strong self sleeps peacefully, having said what needed to be said and done what needed to be done without attachment to others' responses. As the transformation progresses, you begin to recognize the weak self in others and feel compassion rather than irritation for their desperate behaviors. You remember your own journey from desperation to magnetism and can sometimes serve as a quiet example of another way of being, though you never evangelize or explain the process unless specifically asked. The relationship with success transforms as well. The weak self needed others to acknowledge and validate its achievements. The strong self finds satisfaction in the work itself and the internal knowledge of excellence achieved. External recognition becomes pleasant but not necessary, a bonus rather than the primary motivation. This inner transformation eventually becomes visible to everyone around you, though they may not be able to articulate what has changed. People begin to describe you differently, as more confident, more interesting, more magnetic, though you are not trying to be any of these things. You are simply being authentic to your transformed self. The weak self was always performing for an audience, exhausting itself with the constant work of impression management. The strong self has dismissed the audience and performs for an audience of one itself. This shift from external validation to internal satisfaction creates a sustainability that the weak self could never achieve. Professional relationships become more efficient and effective when you operate from this transformed state. Colleagues stop testing your boundaries because your boundaries become clear and consistent. Supervisors respect your judgment because you demonstrate it through action rather than explanation. Subordinates trust your leadership because it comes from authentic strength rather than insecure positioning. The transformation affects decision-making processes as well. The weak self made decisions based on what would be easiest to explain or defend to others. The strong self makes decisions based on what is right according to its own values and wisdom. This shift often leads to better outcomes and always leads to greater peace of mind. Energy levels increase dramatically during this transformation. The exhausting work of managing perceptions, seeking validation, and explaining yourself is replaced by the energizing work of creating value and living authentically. You wake up with more energy and end days feeling fulfilled rather than drained. The relationship with mistakes changes as well. The weak self viewed mistakes as catastrophes requiring extensive explanation and damage control. The strong self views mistakes as learning opportunities, acknowledging them briefly and moving forward without dwelling on others' reactions. This approach actually increases others' confidence in your judgment rather than decreasing it. Creativity flourishes when you operate from this transformed state. The weak self was often paralyzed by concern for others' opinions, second-guessing creative impulses and playing it safe to avoid criticism. The strong self creates from authentic inspiration, allowing creativity to flow without the interference of external judgment. The transformation affects physical health as well. The constant stress of the weak self, always proving, chasing, explaining, creates chronic tension and exhaustion. The peace of the strong self allows the body to relax and recover, often leading to improved health markers and increased vitality. Financial opportunities increase when you operate from this transformed state. The weak self often repelled financial opportunities through desperation and neediness. The strong self attracts opportunities through competence and confidence, creating value that naturally leads to financial reward. Social circles naturally evolve during this transformation. People who were drawn to your neediness find themselves less interested when you become self-sufficient. Meanwhile, higher quality individuals who respect strength and authenticity become more interested in developing relationships with you. The transformation extends to how you handle compliments and criticism. The weak self desperately sought compliments and was devastated by criticism. The strong self receives compliments gracefully without becoming addicted to them and hears criticism as information without becoming defensive about it. Travel and new experiences take on different meaning when approached from this transformed state. The weak self often traveled to impress others or create stories for social media. The strong self travels for authentic experience and personal growth, finding fulfillment in the experience itself rather than others' reactions to it. Learning accelerates when you operate from this transformed state. The weak self was often too proud to admit ignorance or too insecure to ask questions. The strong self learns voraciously, asking questions freely and admitting ignorance without embarrassment, because its self-worth is not tied to knowing everything. The relationship with possessions transforms as well. The weak self accumulated possessions to impress others or compensate for internal emptiness. The strong self acquires possessions based on genuine need or enjoyment, finding that material things lose their power to provide validation once internal validation is achieved. Conflict resolution becomes more effective when you operate from this transformed state. The weak self escalated conflicts through defensive explanations and justifications. The strong self resolves conflicts through clear communication and principled positions, often finding that others respect firm boundaries more than desperate explanations. The transformation affects mentoring and teaching as well. The weak self taught from a need to demonstrate its knowledge and gain respect. The strong self teaches from a genuine desire to help others grow, making the learning experience more effective and satisfying for everyone involved. Romantic relationships deepen when you approach them from this transformed state. Partners are attracted to your self-sufficiency and confidence, creating healthier dynamics based on choice rather than neediness. The relationship becomes about sharing abundance rather than filling voids. The weak self died slowly, through 1,000 small deaths of pride, ego, and the desperate need for external validation. Each moment of choosing silence over explanation, each instance of allowing others their opinions without argument, each time you refrained from chasing what should come naturally, all of these moments contributed to the death of who you were and the birth of who you were meant to become. In the end, the man who destroys his weak self becomes truly indestructible, not because he has built impenetrable defenses, but because he has eliminated the vulnerabilities that others might exploit. He cannot be destroyed by criticism because he does not depend on others' approval. He cannot be manipulated through flattery because he does not need external validation. He cannot be controlled through others' moods because his peace comes from within. This is the ultimate Machiavellian strategy, the complete transformation from seeker to sovereign, from one who needs to one who provides, from one who chases to one who draws. It is not about becoming heartless or disconnected, but about becoming so complete within yourself that you can engage with others from a place of strength rather than neediness. The aura that emerges from this transformation cannot be faked or manufactured through technique. It is the natural result of a man who has resolved his relationship with himself and no longer needs others to complete the equation. This aura draws people not through manipulation but through the magnetic force of authentic confidence and self-possession. When you reach this state, you realize that everything you thought you needed from others was already within you. The respect you chased was the respect you needed to give yourself. The validation you sought was the validation you needed to provide yourself. The love you desperately wanted was the love you needed to cultivate within yourself. The journey from weak to strong, from desperate to magnetic, from seeker to sovereign, represents the most important transformation a man can undergo. It is the death of everything small and the birth of everything magnificent. It is the ultimate act of self-creation, the final victory over the forces that would keep you small. In this transformed state, you understand that you never needed to prove anything to anyone. You simply needed to become who you truly are beneath all the layers of insecurity and desperation. The man who emerges from this transformation cannot be destroyed by others because he has already destroyed everything in himself that was destructible, leaving only what is eternal, unshakable, and magnificently authentic. This is the way of the truly powerful, not to seek power over others, but to achieve complete mastery over oneself. Not to destroy enemies, but to destroy the weaknesses within that create enemies. Not to build walls against the world, but to build such inner strength that walls become unnecessary. The man who has completed this transformation stands as living proof that the greatest fortress is not built of stone and mortar, but of self-knowledge, authentic confidence, and the unshakable certainty that comes from being completely at peace with who you are. This is the aura that draws them in, not because you are trying to attract anyone, but because you have become someone worth being drawn to.